I was about to leave the office, thinking it was just another late night. Then she closed the door behind me and said, "Now you're not leaving." In that moment, everything between us shifted, and I realized some feelings can't wait for tomorrow. The office was quiet, too quiet for my liking. The usual hum of conversation and ringing phones had faded hours ago, leaving only the low, constant drone of the air conditioning and the faint creak of the building settling. I stayed behind, the glow of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the papers scattered in neat piles. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, finishing one last report, but my thoughts kept wandering, mostly to her. She had passed by my desk a few times during the day, but now, in the dimly lit office, there was something different about her presence. She moved with that effortless confidence I had always noticed, but rarely allowed myself to dwell on. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she approached, and I could feel my chest tighten slightly, a mix of admiration and a strange, quiet anticipation. "Still here?" she asked, her voice carrying that calm authority that had kept our office running smoothly for years. There was no judgment in it, just genuine curiosity, and perhaps a hint of amusement. I looked up, catching the way the lamplight highlighted the subtle lines of experience around her eyes and the gentle curve of her smile. "I wanted to finish this tonight," I admitted, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed a bit of nervousness. She walked slowly past, glancing at my screen, and then paused, resting a hand lightly on the back of my chair. It was a simple gesture, almost accidental, but it made my skin tingle in a way I couldn't explain. The warmth of her touch was fleeting, but the effect lingered, pulling me into a quiet awareness of her presence. "Most people would have called it a night hours ago," she said softly, almost to herself. Then, meeting my eyes, she added, "I'm impressed." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. In that moment, the office felt smaller, warmer somehow, as if her presence alone could fill the empty space. I tried to return her gaze, but my mind stumbled, unsure how to articulate the admiration I had carried silently for so long. There was something intimate in this quiet routine, a connection that had always existed just beneath the surface, but now seemed closer, more tangible. The soft hum of the city outside the window provided a backdrop, the distant lights flickering like tiny stars against the dark skyline. Every small movement of hers, the shift of her weight, the way her hair caught the lamplight, seemed amplified in the stillness. I realized then that these late hours, the silence, and her unexpected attention were giving me something rare, a moment to notice her not as my boss, but as a person. Someone layered, complex, quietly strong, and unexpectedly human. And for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I didn't want the moment to end. As she walked away, the gentle click of her heels fading down the corridor, I felt a subtle ache of anticipation, as though the night had only just begun, and somehow, I knew it would not be long before our worlds, usually so separate, would collide in ways I hadn't yet imagined. She moved closer, her steps quiet but deliberate, closing the distance between us in the empty office. The hum of the air conditioning filled the small space between us, but it wasn't the only thing I could feel. There was a presence in her that seemed to draw the room in, a warmth that made the lamplight feel softer, the shadows gentler. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" she asked, her voice calm, but carrying a subtle edge of concern. I looked up from the papers in front of me, startled for a moment by the intimacy of the question. It wasn't a casual inquiry about work, it was personal. It demanded honesty, not a rehearsed answer. I don't want to disappoint you," I said, almost before I had a chance to think. My words sounded smaller than I intended, but the honesty in them made the space between us feel charged. She smiled then, a small, knowing smile that softened the lines of authority I had always associated with her. "You're serious about that, aren't you?" Her eyes searched mine, not with judgment, but with something quieter, interest, perhaps, or curiosity. Without warning, she rested a hand lightly on the back of my chair. The contact was gentle, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a ripple through me. It was one of those touches that felt intentional and yet effortless, leaving me aware of her presence in a way that words could not capture. Her fingers hovered for a moment, brushing against the edge of my sleeve, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the office heat. "Most people would have left hours ago," she murmured, leaning slightly closer so that I could feel the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of floral and something warmer, earthier. I was aware of the small details, the gentle curve of her hand, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, and the way her eyes lingered on mine as if she were reading more than just my words. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I just wanted to finish this tonight. I like knowing it's done. My voice was steadier now, though my heart had begun to beat faster, aware of the closeness between us. Her smile deepened, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment, the air between us felt thick, heavy with unspoken meaning. I can see that, she said softly, and it's admirable. She tilted her head slightly, the gesture both casual and intimate, and I felt the pull of her attention, a quiet gravity that made it impossible to look away. We stood there, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, yet far enough to maintain the fragile tension of propriety. In that small, quiet office, the usual boundaries seemed to blur. Her presence was both grounding and exhilarating, a gentle command that drew me into the moment without a single word of coercion. As she stepped back, the brief contact lingered in my mind, leaving an impression deeper than any conversation we had shared before. The night felt suddenly charged with possibility, a subtle promise that the ordinary routines of work could give way to something far more intimate, far more real. The office had grown quieter somehow, as if the building itself was holding its breath. She moved toward the door, her steps deliberate, and I felt a flicker of something unexpected in my chest, a sudden awareness that this was no longer just another late night. She paused for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. I could see the faint reflection of the city lights on her hair, and the warm glow of the desk lamp softened the sharp lines of her features. Then she closed it. Slowly, the soft click of the lock echoed in the room, startling me more than I expected. The sound carried weight, an unspoken declaration that whatever happened next would be between us, contained in this small, glowing space. She turned to face me, her posture relaxed yet commanding, and there was a glint in her eyes, serious, curious, and just a little challenging. "Now you're not leaving," she said, her voice calm but firm, carrying a weight that made me sit up a little straighter. It wasn't threatening, it was deliberate, precise, and somehow intimate. The words alone had shifted the air between us, transforming it into something tense, yet strangely inviting. I swallowed, aware of how quickly my pulse had risen. The dim light made her eyes sparkle with subtle warmth, and for a moment I felt exposed, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that demanded honesty, a truth I had kept quietly to myself. My hands, resting on the edge of the desk, felt heavier somehow, as though the room itself was asking me to acknowledge the pull I had felt since she first approached me hours ago. She stepped closer, her movement measured, her presence undeniable. The faint scent of her perfume mingled with the paper and ink of the office, and it was disarming. It made the ordinary surroundings feel intimate, like the room existed only for the two of us in that moment. Her gaze met mine, steady and unflinching, yet there was an almost imperceptible softness, a vulnerability hidden behind her composed exterior. "I want to know the truth," she added, her voice a little lower now, almost a whisper. "Not about work. About you, about why you do this, why you stay when everyone else leaves." Her hand brushed against the edge of the desk as she leaned slightly, the movement casual, but every inch of her proximity heightened my awareness. I felt the pull of her presence, the gentle gravity of her attention, and I realized I could no longer hide the admiration and something deeper that had been quietly growing inside me. I stayed because I hesitated, words failing me for a moment. I wanted her to understand that it wasn't just about finishing reports or earning her approval. It was about being near her, noticing her, being in the rare, quiet moments that revealed who she truly was. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Her eyes never left mine, and I noticed every subtle movement. The way her fingers brushed the desk, the soft rise and fall of her shoulders, the gentle tilt of her head that seemed both curious and patient. In that suspended moment, the office became smaller, warmer, and charged with an intimacy neither of us dared to define aloud. Closing the door had done more than lock us in physically. It had opened the space between us, letting vulnerability, desire, and curiosity flow into the room, binding us in a quiet tension that promised something neither of us would forget. After closing the door, she lingered near the desk, her presence more intimate than I had ever allowed myself to notice before. The city lights outside glimmered faintly, casting a soft glow across her face. The quiet hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, but it no longer felt empty. It felt alive, charged with a subtle, unspoken anticipation. She sighed, a quiet, almost weary sound, and for the first time, I saw a crack in the composed exterior I had always admired. "Sometimes, I wonder if people really see me," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They see the boss, the authority figure, but rarely the person beneath it." Her gaze flicked down to her hands resting on the edge of the desk, the way her fingers curled slightly betraying a vulnerability that contrasted sharply with her usual poise. I hesitated, not wanting to overstep, but compelled by the honesty in her tone. "I see more than that," I said carefully. "I see someone strong, capable, but also someone who carries a lot quietly." My words felt small, almost awkward, yet the sincerity behind them seemed to resonate. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine fully, and I could feel a shift. There was a softness there now, a flicker of surprise as if she hadn't expected someone to notice these hidden layers. The room, dimly lit and filled with the faint scent of her perfume, felt warmer, more intimate. I became acutely aware of the subtle details. The way her shoulders sloped just slightly as she leaned on the desk, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the way the lamplight caught the faint silver threads in her hair. She moved closer, and without thinking, I noticed the brush of her knee against my chair. It was accidental, or at least, it seemed accidental, but it sent a shiver of awareness down my spine. Every small gesture between us carried weight, charged with an intimacy that neither of us had spoken aloud. "I've built walls so high," she continued, voice softening further, "that I sometimes forget what it's like to let someone in." Her hands traced lightly over the edge of the desk, stopping just short of touching mine. Yet the proximity alone felt like a deliberate test of boundaries. I wanted to tell her that I could see past the walls, that I wanted to be there even if she hesitated. "I don't see walls," I whispered. "I see strength. And I see someone who deserves to be seen, truly seen." For a moment, time seemed suspended. The office, the papers, the empty chairs, the soft hum of machinery faded into the background. It was just her and me, two people navigating the fragile, electric territory of vulnerability. I noticed the subtle intake of her breath, the slight widening of her eyes, and the way her lips parted as if considering whether to speak but deciding against it. Then, in a gesture that felt both casual and deliberate, she leaned back slightly against the desk, the faint brush of her arm against mine sending another ripple of awareness through me. It was a small, seemingly inconsequential touch, yet it spoke volumes: trust, openness, and an unspoken invitation. In that moment, I realized that the dynamic between us had shifted. The late-night office, once a space of routine and quiet work, had become a stage for something deeper, a delicate unveiling of ourselves, a slow-burning connection that neither of us could ignore. The silence stretched between us, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with meaning, a quiet tension that seemed to hum in the dimly lit office. The hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of city lights outside were the only interruptions, but even they seemed to emphasize the intimacy of the moment. I could feel her presence as acutely as my own heartbeat, steady, warm, undeniable. She didn't move away. Instead, she lingered near my desk, leaning slightly forward, her gaze fixed on mine. It was a look I had never seen directed at me before, intense, attentive, and layered with something unspoken. My pulse quickened with every subtle shift of her expression, every flicker of emotion that passed across her face. I became aware of every small detail: the faint scent of her perfume, a gentle mix of floral and warmth, lingering in the air, the soft rustle of her clothing as she adjusted her posture, the way her fingers grazed the edge of my desk, as if testing the space between us. Each gesture, so subtle, felt magnified in the quiet, drawing me closer to her without a single word. She reached for a stray piece of paper on my desk, her hand brushing lightly against my wrist. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, or perhaps deliberately so, and it left a shiver in its wake. My skin tingled where her fingers had touched me, and for a moment, the mundane office felt suspended, replaced by an invisible thread connecting us in silent understanding. Neither of us spoke immediately. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive, in the fragile intimacy of the moment. Instead, we existed in the quiet awareness of each other, letting glances and small gestures convey what neither had yet admitted aloud. Her eyes lingered on mine, and I caught the faintest quiver of emotion, a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath her composed exterior. Time seemed to stretch, elastic and slow, allowing every heartbeat and breath to be felt more deeply. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed, the gentle tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips as if poised to smile, yet holding back. My own hands twitched slightly, restless, wanting to bridge the space but unsure of how to do so without shattering the delicate tension. The city beyond the window twinkled like distant stars, but my attention remained entirely on her. Every subtle movement, every fleeting expression seemed charged with meaning. It was as if the room had shrunk, leaving only us, two people aware of an unspoken pull neither dared to define yet. Finally, she met my gaze fully and held it, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. No words were needed. The quiet tension had spoken louder than anything could. I felt the weight of her attention, the warmth of her presence, and the quiet promise that something was quietly beginning between us, something delicate, electric, and real. Even in that simple, suspended moment, I realized how profoundly her presence affected me. The late-night office, once just a backdrop for routine work, had become a private stage for a slow-burning connection, one built on silent understanding, lingering touches, and the thrill of what neither of us had yet admitted. The quiet between us stretched long enough for my thoughts to spiral, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. Every glance, every pause, every subtle movement of hers carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I became acutely aware of the small details, the faint shimmer of city lights on her hair, the soft curve of her shoulders as she leaned against the desk, the delicate rhythm of her breathing that seemed to echo in my own chest. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, intimate, almost hesitant. Sometimes, I wonder if I've built walls so high that no one ever dares to climb them. Her words weren't directed at me as a challenge, but they felt personal, vulnerable in a way that both startled and captivated me. I felt my throat tighten, unsure of what to say. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that the walls weren't there for me, that I wanted to be closer, wanted to see the person beneath the authority. I don't see walls, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I see strength, and someone who deserves to be seen for more than just what everyone else notices. Her eyes widened slightly, and I caught a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of relief, as if she hadn't expected anyone to understand her so clearly. She stayed where she was, leaning lightly against the desk, and the subtle brush of her arm against mine made my pulse quicken. Every small gesture, every shared glance, felt magnified in the quiet of the office, as though the air itself had thickened with anticipation. She looked down briefly, then back up, and our eyes met fully. The intensity of her gaze sent a shiver through me, soft, electric, impossible to ignore. Slowly, almost deliberately, she reached for my hand. Her fingers curled slightly around mine, testing the waters, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly in hers, feeling the warmth, the gentle pressure, and the unspoken message it carried. For a moment, everything outside the office, deadlines, responsibilities, the hum of the city, disappeared. It was just her and me, suspended in a quiet intimacy that neither words nor time could define. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingertips, the almost imperceptible quiver of emotion that passed across her face, and it made my chest tighten with both desire and tenderness. I didn't think anyone would notice, she admitted softly, her voice carrying both vulnerability and the faintest amusement. She lifted her eyes to mine again, and I realized she was measuring me, seeing if I would stay, seeing if I could meet her honesty with my own. I squeezed her hand gently, a small, grounding gesture that spoke louder than words. I notice, I whispered, and I want to. For a long moment, we remained like that, hands lightly touching, breaths mingling, eyes locked. The tension was no longer silent. It had become a living, pulsing thing, delicate yet undeniable. It was a promise of something just beginning, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been quietly building over these late hours. Then she exhaled, a soft, almost self-deprecating laugh escaping her lips, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a gentle smile. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, softened, warmed, and filled with unspoken hope. In that single, suspended moment, I knew that whatever came next, the night had changed us both. She leaned back slightly, a faint, self-conscious smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The tension that had held the room taut for hours seemed to soften, replaced by something warmer, gentler. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully notice the subtle vulnerability in her posture. The way her shoulders relaxed, the small curve of her spine leaning against the desk, the quiet exhale that hinted at relief. "You make it very hard to keep things simple," she murmured, almost to herself, almost teasing, but there was an undercurrent of sincerity I couldn't ignore. I felt my chest tighten at the words, not because of what she said, but because of how close we had become without uttering the words neither of us dared to speak aloud. I reached out instinctively, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, careful not to overstep. My fingers lingered at her temple, feeling the warmth of her skin, the delicate softness of her hair. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a subtle invitation, and for a moment, I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat beneath the surface of her calm demeanor. The office, once a place of rigid structure and endless deadlines, now felt like a private sanctuary. The hum of the air conditioning was softer somehow. The city lights outside flickered like distant stars, and the papers on the desk became background noise to the intimacy that had quietly grown between us. Every small gesture, the lingering brush of hands, the tilt of a head, the shared glance, carried meaning, unspoken but undeniable. She leaned forward briefly, resting her forehead against my shoulder. It was a fleeting gesture, gentle and understated, yet it spoke volumes. The warmth of her body against mine, the slight pressure of her cheek, the soft, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her breath, it all created a connection deeper than words could convey. I stayed still, letting the moment stretch, savoring the quiet intimacy that had blossomed between us over these late hours. When she finally pulled back, she straightened, smoothing her blouse with a casual grace that belied the emotional weight of the moment. She reached for the doorknob, unlocking it slowly, and paused, glancing back at me. That look, soft, knowing, filled with promise, was enough to convey everything we hadn't yet said. It wasn't a confession, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement, of desire, of trust, of the quiet bond that had formed in the silence and shadows of the office. I realized then that our relationship had shifted irreversibly. The professional boundaries remained, yes, but underneath, something more profound had taken root, something delicate, slow-burning, and entirely real. I felt gratitude, awe, and a gentle thrill at the thought of what might come next, tempered by the quiet satisfaction of the moment we had just shared. As she stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar, I watched her go with a sense of warmth and hope. The office was quiet again, but it felt different now, charged with the memory of her presence, the intimacy of unspoken understanding, and the promise of a connection that was only just beginning. That night, nothing had been rushed. Everything had been earned in glances, touches, and words unspoken. And somehow, that made it perfect. If this slow-burn office romance captured your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that stir the soul. Comment below, would you stay behind after hours if it meant a moment like this? Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of love that unfolds slowly, one heartbeat at a time.